And now, our feature presentation.
Now, what the f*** was I talking about?
You said True Blue was about a sensitive guy meets a nice guy, but Like a Virgin was a metaphor for big dicks.
Okay, I'll tell you what Like a Virgin is about. It's all about this coos who's a regular f*** machine. And I'm talking about morning, day, night, afternoon. Dick, 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 dick.
How many dicks was that? A lot.
Oh yeah, this is gonna be a good one. Reservoir Dogs, the video game.
Is it bad?
When I learned of this game's existence, a month and a half ago or so, I definitely was a little bit cynical at first. I mean, of all of the Tarantino films suited for a solid adaptation, I didn't see a whole lot of potential in a game adaptation of what was essentially a blood-soaked, single-location mammoth play. Because while the movie is absolutely a captivating, edge-of-your-seat masterpiece, most of the tension and adrenaline is delivered in memorable dialogue and exotic dance. So, of course, I picked myself up a copy, played through all 5 or so hours of it, and much to my surprise, I found not only an overlooked game made by a clearly passionate group of developers, but also a hell of a background story to go along with it. So join me today in the mortuary as we discuss not only how a developer of children's games would walk away with the contract for Reservoir Dogs while covered in blood, but also why it was banned in multiple countries, why you likely didn't even know it existed, and get to hear from some of the folks involved in making it all possible.
Let's go to work.
The history of Reservoir Dogs as a video game goes all the way back to 2003 when Carmageddon publisher SCI Games, later acquired by Eidos Interactive, would purchase the rights for the film from Artisan Entertainment. While originally planned to be developed in-house by SCI themselves, the publisher began accepting pitches from other developers, one of whom being a British studio, Blitz Games. While Blitz Games did make sense in one hand, as they did have a lot of success with 6th generation tie-in games, the tie-in games they were known for were almost exclusively children's games. Barbie Horse Adventures, The Fairly Odd Parents, Lilo and Stitch, Chicken Run, Bratz Rock Angels, stuff like that.
Whatever.
But times they were a-changin', and with M-rated fares such as GTA sweeping up record sales, it only makes sense that they would consider tying into more adult and graphic titles, and Blitz were determined to be the ones to get the job. So determined, in fact, that Blitz would go into the pitch meeting armed not only with their vision for the game, but with blood and body parts. According to a 2019 article by The Escapist, Blitz co-founder Philip Oliver would recount the meeting as such. They dressed up as the Reservoir Dogs. Somehow they got a hold of the suits and thin black ties. One of them actually stained his shirt with blood splatters. Partway through the meeting, they presented a cut ear. They brought out of a black briefcase an ear on a white tile all covered in blood and everything. I think it was all resin, but they said it looked quite funny on the boardroom table.
That's disgusting. Well, I didn't know. That is so disgusting. I can't believe you just did that.
Blitz would beat out over 24 other candidates that day, walking away victorious and stylish in blood-stained suits, a severed ear in one hand, and a development contract in the other. But the feelings of victory wouldn't last long, as the team had been given just over a year to complete the project from the ground up and only got $1 million to make it with. The idea we took with the game was to actually carry out the heist you never saw in the film. We've done a lot of movie games and you always had to follow exactly the plot of the movie, but actually that makes a game incredibly linear, and 90% of the time the people who buy the game have seen the film. So all you're doing is recreating a pretty low-res version of what the film was, and it never really lives up to it. You never saw how everything screwed up and the police chase and everything else. It's actually quite nice because you haven't got anything to compare it against. It allowed it to be what it needs to be to make a great game. Another really interesting point that that the article writer Anthony McGlynn highlights in this tremendous escapist article is the division between the staff at the sudden proposal to begin working on something so grotesque. Everybody was happy about coming into work and making great games, but they were never cool games, Phillips said. So a lot of the people who went on to Reservoir Dogs thought it was really, really cool. But he would go on to say that not everyone shared that enthusiasm, saying there were a few people who refused to work on Reservoir Dogs, just saying, "I'm sorry, it's too violent and it's not for me." The devs who did find the project refreshing and cool, however, were all in. Narrative designers reportedly watched the movie constantly, engrossing themselves in everything from watching Tarantino's films to reading his screenplays and interviews.
Why the need for so much gruesome, graphic violence? Why not let us imagine
Because it's so much fun, Chan. Get it?
Aiming to capture what the game's writer James Parker refers to as the texture of the film's timeless dialogue.
Dick, 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 dick. How many dicks is that? A lot.
Things were going well for Blitz. The script was solid, the gameplay mechanics were beginning to gel, but they had just one little problem. Out of the 8 actors who made up the titular dogs, only one of them would agree to reprise his role for the film. Luckily, that one actor was Michael Madsen, renowned for his roles as the gleefully psychotic and nimble Mr. Blonde, which would have been one of the hardest roles for another actor to imitate. Like most studios of this size, Blitz always had multiple projects in the works simultaneously, and while the Reservoir Dogs team sweated away to make their deadline, another side of the studio had just shipped another tie-in of their own, Bad Boys Miami Takedown.
There's a whole other thing going on here.
It was the first M-rated game Blitz had released, and it did not do well. Receiving universally unfavorable reviews and single-star grades across GameCube, PC, PS2, and Xbox, Blitz didn't exactly make the first impression they'd hoped for in this brave new world of polygonal violence, and the game would wind up on numerous worst games of all time lists even to this very day.
There a reason why you pointing that thing at me? Hey, screw you, man. Why am I playing this game?
So, whether due to the poor reception of Bad Boys, the rise of controversy surrounding violence in video games, or something else entirely, Blitz decided Reservoir Dogs would be released under a pseudonym, a brand new subsidiary that would deal exclusively in M-rated games, accurately titled Volatile Games, and their first game would release on October 24th, 2006.
You ever listen to K-Billy's Super Sounds of the 70s?
It should come as no surprise that a game made by a team so devoted to their vision they would go into a pitch meeting covered in blood would end up making a game reflective of that very same conviction, because in Reservoir Dogs, they do. They go all the way.
You wanna fuck with me? I'll show you a fucking way.
Shoot me, you little piece of shit.
I mean, look at this. They put a severed ear right on the disc. I love it. This is one of the coolest things in my collection. What is created plot-wise for the game is obviously much more bombastic and large-scale than you would picture taking place throughout a story that is so grounded, but it's a PlayStation 2 game. We're gonna get some car chases, helicopters, and SWAT teams, and I'm fine with that. I'm especially fine with it, in fact, thanks to how much reverence and understanding the team regularly demonstrates for the source material.
Why am I Mr. Pink?
Because you're a alright?
Surprisingly enough, while the game features roughly half an hour of line-for-line scenes recreated from the film with every actor except Michael Madsen replaced, I can't believe it, but these guys actually did a pretty good job. I was nervous at first that this was going to be some local theater level acting, and I was shocked that these are impressions and not actual clips from the movie.
What'd I tell you? That sick piece of shit was a stone-cold psycho.
You could have asked the cop if he didn't just kill him. He talked about what he was gonna do when he was slicing him up.
I'll get into some of my favorite little storyline and character touches the devs introduced in a little bit, but first let's break down exactly how Reservoir Dogs works as a video game. One of the most crucial and impressive systems in this game are its hostage mechanics, which are some of the most advanced I've ever seen. Let's say you want to get from one end of a room to another, and you've got a bunch of cops in your way.
Now we got a situation, and it's all because of this $5 an hour rent-a-car.
You can either shoot your way through everyone, which is totally valid, or you can grab a hostage.
Now we can start having some f***ing fun.
If the cops in front of you don't put their guns down, you can bash the hostage on the noggin either with your gun or a medicine cabinet.
Don't do this.
Whatever is nearby, and force them to put down their weapons. Then you can take your right analog stick, lock on to the enemies, and physically move them to wherever you want them to go. They will then put their hands on their heads and face the wall, and so long as you didn't accidentally knock your hostage into beauty sleep, you can just keep carrying your boy to victory. Pretty neat, right? But here's the coolest part. You don't have to do that. See, what's so ironic about Reservoir Dogs is that you're playing a game with very little wiggle room when it comes to narrative, but in return get all the freedom in the world when it comes to gameplay. You don't even have to learn the hostage system if you don't want to, and you can still beat this thing. All that you're required to do is get from point A of a level to point B of a level, but how you get there and the way you choose to play that level is entirely up to you. At the end of each level, you're presented with a spectrum from professional to psychopath.
What you're supposed to do is act like a fucking professional. Psychopath ain't a professional.
And how you play each level determines how you place on that spectrum and ultimately which ending you'll receive as a result. There's no right way to do anything. If you run out of bullets, you can take a cop hostage, make every other cop get on their hands and knees facing the wall, knock the cop you're holding hostage unconscious, pick up the shotgun he drops, and of course, because this is a third-person shooter on the PS2, we do get a bullet time mechanic, but because this is Reservoir Dogs, they named the mechanic Bullet Festival.
All I know is what Vic told me, man. He said the place turned into a fucking bullet festival.
The biggest downfall to the gameplay, sadly, is how repetitive it gets. It doesn't take long before you start recognizing similar locations, highways, and alleyways, and beyond taking hostages, blasting away cops, and slinging one-liners.
Sorry, my finger slipped.
This thing does get pretty light on content rather quickly. Luckily, it's only about 4 hours long, so if you love the movie like I do, it should be worth a playthrough just for the little references and reenactments if nothing else. Besides, the only enemies in the game are cops, so like, how boring can it really be? And that brings me to the story, references, and overall presentation of the game, which is by far the strongest part of the experience. If I broke down every little reference they make here, this video would span the length of the game itself, so let me just highlight some of the little touches, many of which go completely unspoken, that I feel go a long way. Just before Mr. Brown, played by Quentin Tarantino, dies in the film, he complains about blood in his eyes and worries that he's blind, which causes him to crash the car.
You're not blind, you just got blood in your eyes, alright?
Instead of simply referencing this in the game, we get an entire car chase sequence with blood on the screen, gradually obscuring our view and making the chase more hectic and tense as Mr. Brown tries to escape the cops with blood in his eyes.
Hey, what is this in my eye, man? You're not blind, you just got blood in your eyes.
A big point of contention in the film was Mr. Blonde's handling of the civilians inside the bank after they set off the alarm. While there is disagreement in the film as to how that could have been handled differently, the game puts that very decision into the hands of the player in nearly every level. You're making your way through a level or even the very bank itself, and you see an old woman going towards the alarm. How are you gonna respond? While the warm company of a hostage is fun, all good things must come to an end, and you have a few different choices as to how you would like to bring your partnership to a close. You could let them go, but the risk of them going for an alarm is never zero. So if you don't want to take that chance, you can always just administer a character's signature move. For some, like Pink and Nice Guy Eddie, it's just beating them into a deep sleep with a pistol. But for Mr. Blonde, of course, it's cutting their ear off. For Mr. Blue, it's stubbing their eye out with a lit cigar. And for Mr. White, it's cutting off a character's finger. We don't see which finger he chooses, but I think it's safe to assume it's
the little one.
What's even cooler than all of that is that if you choose to go that route, the camera will pan diagonal from the scene where your character is beating on the hostage, perfectly mirroring the way the camera turns away from Marvin Nash as Blonde administers surgery on his face in the movie. Oh, speaking of which, with all the hubbub and controversy surrounding violence and video games rampant in media at the time, how did the team plan to handle the Blonde versus Nash torture sequence? Oh, they just do the whole scene?
I'm so scared, I guess I'll fall on my chair. And I wanna know
While that is cool, I do have to say I wish there was some kind of gameplay angle to the torture sequence as opposed to just watching a cutscene. Wouldn't you have loved the opportunity to jiggle the razor back and forth a bit with the analog sticks or something while we chop the cop's ear off? Or how about a little mini game where the controller vibrates as we chew through cartilage or have to start over if we accidentally impale his eardrum? Another great sequence involving Nash is the way the game handles the capture and subsequent borrowing of his person.
And I got a surprise for you.
In the lead up to gifting him to White and Pink. They could have just made this a car chase, but in the rah-rah team spirit the devs are clearly bursting with, they had to take things a bit further. Not only are we driving away with Homie in the trunk listening to Blonde heckling him from the front seat.
Hey, how's it going back there? Comfortable?
Let me out!
But we're also getting to see him wiggle around in the back as the team made the brilliant decision to just keep the trunk open.
Are you enjoying it yet?
This also adds a clever gameplay mechanic where if we sit still or slow down for too long, Nash will leap out like a Jackass sketch.
I need to get to 95. Go! Get the car. Yo, he got out!
Even the game menu feels like the movie. Look at this. This is not a game menu. This is a DVD menu. We got a sizzle reel of clips playing behind us in stylized boxes. We've got a scene selection with each chapter of the game named after a classic quote relevant to that scene. As someone who grew up loving DVDs, this is exactly the kind of menu I would imagine waking up to and hearing play over and over and over and over again in the morning. I know I'm going on like a broken record here, but I just can't understate how much love and effort and passion clearly went into this game, and it's a terminal bummer how underappreciated and unknown it is. Oh, that reminds me, we should probably move on and discuss the game's reception and release a bit because that is a whole nother thing entirely. Controversy surrounding a Reservoir Dogs game that even slightly remains faithful to its source material was bound to end up in controversy, and according to Blitz co-founder Philip Oliver, that was all going according to plan, telling The Escapist, the more stories they have about the violence, the more it's gonna sell. We expected it to be 18 and we wanted it to be 18. If it had been a 13 or so, people would have gone, what have you done with it? You've ruined it. You've tamed it down. Controversy as a marketing tactic was especially driven home by a hysterical TV ad called Granny, where an old lady word for word recounts the opening like a virgin monologue to her 2 grandchildren.
Dick, 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 dick.
I've linked the entire minute and 40-second version in the description. You are welcome. Despite selling over 750,000 copies, the game would be banned in several territories, including Japan, Germany, and Australia, in large part due to the character's signature moves, which is kind of insane considering you don't even see anything and it's all implied violence. Like, for all we know, they're just giving them a little kiss. Regardless, the game would be added to Germany's media harmful to young persons list, which prevents its sale to minors, and would be outright banned in New Zealand and Australia. And while there were numerous stories and reports disparaging its gruesome content, the fires of controversy would be effectively snuffed out by the reviews, which were largely on the lower end of mixed and not because of the violence. Usually, this is where I would list off scores and sum up reviews, but unfortunately, pretty much all the reviews for this game, no matter the score, all kinda said the same thing. The gameplay is repetitive and lacks replayability, the driving sections are outdated and boring, and while some reviews would praise the fan service, the game was seen as average at best and awfully boring at worst. And I would be lying if I said I didn't agree with many of these derisions. The game is repetitive, it does feel much older than it is, and as innovative and as interesting as the hostage mechanics are, they do begin to lose their novelty rather quickly. But you've got to remember, this thing was made in just over a year and was tasked with bearing the Sisyphusian weight of one of the most beloved crime films in cinema history. The fact that they even pulled it off to this degree is beyond impressive. Something I love to do on this channel is speak directly with some of the people involved with working on these hidden gems. So now I want to give the floor to level designer and writer James Parker, who is gracious enough to provide us with some more information on the team's experience, struggles, and outlook while working on the game. The difficulty of Reservoir Dogs as a game adaptation is that it shouldn't really exist.
Oh shit!
The whole premise of the movie is that you have to piece together what happened in the diamond heist from the potentially unreliable information that you get from the characters as they arrive at the warehouse and from their various flashbacks. It's also distinctly not an action movie, so making a third-person shooter and arcade driving title could be seen as somewhat ill-judged. However, I reckon the actual design that Blitz settled on was as respectful as it was possible within the constraints of making a bombastic video game spectacle. Splitting the game into journeys of each of the characters from the heist to the warehouse allowed the game to visit some interesting locations, but without forcing too much information into the canon of the story or having the characters interact before they meet up at the warehouse was critical to making it feel like a companion piece rather than trying to retell the story of the film in a game. I'll leave you to decide whether having the characters drive around at 200 miles per hour and doing sweet jumps around Los Angeles was quite as respectful to the source material. The other aspect of the design that was interesting was that the crowd control system in the game genuinely allowed you to play the game in a way that was very different to other shooters at the time, and it was actually possible to finish all the shooting sections without ever firing a shot, and I don't think that the effort would have been put into that were it not for the fact that it was attached to the Reservoir Dogs license. The biggest hurdle was the licensing. The publisher only had limited rights to the film, so key sequences from the film to use as cutscenes had to be meticulously crafted from scratch rather than using footage from the film, and without voices or likenesses from any of the main characters with the exception of Michael Madsen, the main characters had to look legally different, so it always lacked a certain something. The story at the time, and I don't know if this is true or not, was that Harvey Keitel asked for a large gross percentage of any revenues, and the others said they would only do it if they got the same deal as Harvey, which rendered the whole thing economically impossible. Michael Madsen wasn't quite as discerning, so was the only original member of the cast on board, but that provided its own difficulties as he was reluctant to deliver any of the lines from the movie in the way that he originally performed them, which meant that iconic sequences that the team was recreating for the cutscenes ironically suffered from having the actual Mr. Blonde involved.
All you can do is pray for a quick death. Which you ain't gonna get.
Whereas the replacement VO actors that were brought in for the rest of the roles did an amazing job across the board of selling those same sequences.
Don't make me do this.
Larry, stop pointing that f***ing gun at my dad!
Considering all of the challenges, the small team, the quite short turnaround, and the fact that it was a physical release across multiple formats, I think everyone did a pretty good job, and it remains one of those titles that, while not a huge critical success, was incredibly popular with a particular era of players. Huge shout out to James Parker for giving us his time. Following the release of Reservoir Dogs, Volatile would start work on a survival horror game titled Possession, which would be cancelled mid-development to become Dead to Rights Retribution and become inactive directly after. Blitz, on the other hand, would retreat to familiar territory, releasing kids' tie-in games for properties such as Bratz, iCarly, SpongeBob, and Burger King, before announcing in 2013 that they would be closing their doors for good. Quick side note though, with all the studio closures and bullshit announcements we've seen in the past couple of years, most of whom were announced with the same copy-pasted apology from the same disingenuous AI prompt, I have massive respect for how Blitz went about this. Seriously, listen to this. CEO Philip Oliver would tell Eurogamer when the company closed, "It's a run of bad luck. It's a little bit being let down by clients, but in some ways, the biggest thing is a shifting industry. We're going from the boxed games to digital. We've had too big a gap between the consoles. That's not helped. We are a large company in the middle of the market, which wasn't the place to be. THQ was a major client of ours for 10 years, and when you lose a client that gives most of your work, you have to quickly find new clients. To a certain extent, we did. Finding Disney and doing Epic Mickey 2 was an awesome project. We'll always be proud of that and working with people like Warren Spector. But unfortunately, even Disney itself isn't doing that many of those kinds of games anymore. It's been financially difficult for the last year or so, but there have been lots of areas of hope. We've even been talking to investors. There have been some big possible contracts. Basically, we've been trying to stay in there, supporting it with personal savings. There have been a lot of tears. There have been a lot of man tears too. I was expecting a lot of the girls to be beside themselves, and they were, but there have been a lot of men crying, including me. When asked what Philip's plan was for the future, he responded, "Drink whiskeys." I don't know, man, I just find that response incredible. They don't bullshit anyone. They didn't bullshit you. They don't blame players or a market they failed to understand. They didn't try holding on with scams and get-rich-quick schemes. Blitz went out with honesty, full transparency, and candor in a way I don't know if we'll ever see in the current industry landscape. But it didn't end there either. After presumably sobering up from all the aforementioned whiskeys and woe, he started another company, Radiant Worlds, and after being purchased by Rebellion, he would go off to start yet another one, Panavox, which seems to be focusing on turning books into illustrated mobile experiences, which actually sounds like one of the coolest ideas for a mobile experience I've ever heard. What do you guys think? If you played the Reservoir Dogs game, you should absolutely play the Reservoir Dogs game. Let me know what you think. Please like and subscribe for more content like this. I am also playing every PS2 horror game, so stay tuned for that. I know it's been a while since I've done one, but I've got some shit cooking, don't you worry. Huge shout out to Patreon subscribers, Stolen Buns, Baron, Mr. Nobody, and Hot Antonio, as well as my YouTube members, Baron and Racoon Peddlar. Thank you all so much, and I'll smell you later.